So here we are with Brenda Porster. Welcome, Brenda, to our short discussion on translation.
Thank you for inviting me.
So Brenda Porster is a poet and translator. She writes both in Italian and English, but she has been also translating very prolifically from Italian into English, both prose and poetry. And Brenda is also the official translator of the New York University in Florence, as well as for the Florentine Annual Poetry Festival. So, Brenda, since you are a poet originally and then you have started translation, let me start with this question: why do you translate? What motivated you to pick up translation?
Uh, Actually, I think I was translating before I started writing poetry again. I was not writing poetry for a long time. I don't know, more than 20 years. And then something happened in my life, a personal thing that shook me very deeply, and I started to feel the need to write poetry again. But at that point, I had already started translating. I was also working professionally as a translator. I was translating really ever since I arrived in Italy when I was 26. And I mainly now, I'm very often presented with either single poems or collections of poems. And if I have to choose, there are some works that attract me. In fact, it has happened that I have just read some poems in Italian and felt almost a need to be attempting a translation into English. I mean, I've always been interested in the idea of translation, even as a child, in the sense that, well, in my family, people in my family spoke Yiddish. And I never learned Yiddish, but I knew some Yiddish words and phrases. And as a child, I used to think, well, how would we say that in English? Because Yiddish is the kind of language where one word has to be translated with a long sentence in English. And even I think if you're the sort of person who writes, you're interested in words, you're interested in language. And so this has always been, even before I actually started writing translations, in my mind, I would always, and then I'd be translating, and then I moved to Italy, and of course I was going back and forth between two languages. And so sometimes, yes, when I'm reading, especially poetry, in Italian, I just have the urge within me to be, sort of remolding that into English, and to see, well, it's a challenge. Sometimes it's a big challenge. It kind of tickles your mind, it tickles your linguistic imagination. And sometimes I even feel it on my tongue. how would it come out? So that happens as well. That has happened as well. Yeah.
Okay. So, selection of a piece for translation is one thing, but as you get started with translation, uh, do you have a specific approach? I mean, I know many people do translation. I translate it once, keep it, and then go back to it. So people employ different approaches, which new translators can learn from. So, what has been your approach to translation?
Okay, I have to confess something that I think is not the best way to go about things, but it's what I often do. I mean, if I have a relatively short poem, then obviously I read the poem. But if I have, or a short, really short story, but if I have a longer work, and right now I'm translating a very long novel, 400 pages, I don't usually read the whole thing through. before I start translating. Now, I think that this is frowned on. I think people say, no, 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 you must read the whole work to have an idea. And that's perhaps that's true. But I always, if it's a long thing, I want to get into it. I just want to start at the beginning and start getting into it and just see how it moves on in English. And then of course I go back and forth. And so if it's a longer work, a first version is really just a first version. Basically with the first version, I'm just about finishing up a short poetry collection now, which I think is excellent. And even here, the first version is very, very close to, I tried to keep close to the original. I'm not of the school of translators that says, in order to translate, you have to rewrite. I really try to keep as close as possible as I can to what I feel was the intention of the writer, the meaning, but also the versification and possibly the sound, although from English to, if I cannot repeat the sound effects in Italian, then I try to find something that could be equivalently effective in English. But the first time through is really just sort of stumbling through to see how that can be translated all pretty literally into English. And then I find often I have some problems, especially with poetry, things that could be interpreted in different ways, or things that I really have not feel I haven't fully understood. And if it's at all possible at that point, I try to, have a conversation with the author. Obviously, if you're translating classics or dead authors, then but you can't do that. But you can consult previous translations, for example, and compare. So then I have this thing about going through the dark bits to clear those things up. And so I go through it a second time, and as I'm going through, I'm also trying to improve the poetic effect in English. And then I try to let it sit, if I have time, for a little while, and then go back to it and just try to read it through as English poetry, looking as little as possible at the original, trying to, at that point, to be as little influenced by the original as possible, because of course the English reader, most of the English readers will not be referring to the original Italian. And so I try to put myself in the position of an English reader who doesn't know Italian, to see how it reads, how it sounds, how it flows, how it means as an autonomous work in English. So.
Wonderful, Brenda. I mean, it goes on to show, as a translator, not only there is a creativity involved, but there is a lot of effort, as much as the writer's effort in writing the original piece. Probably translators go through the same amount of pangs and effort,
Yeah.
and to bring it to another language and another set of readers. So thanks, Brenda. Thanks for wonderful
Well,
on what you.
well, thank you. I hope that it's been in some way, interesting and, maybe even illuminating for people who are studying out. It's a deeply rewarding experience, but not in financial terms, especially poetry. I think, you just have to really, really love it, because, the rewards are mainly on that level.